Hi, everyone. My name is Dirk Labuschagne, and I am a chaplain at Rush University Medical Center, which is in Chicago, Illinois. And you might detect a bit of an accent, maybe, maybe not. I'm originally from South Africa, and I've been living here in the US for about 15 years now. And here in Chicago, I think the biggest adjustment is the long winters. But I'm certainly appreciating some of the beauty that's part of the winter as well. So I'm really glad to have this opportunity to talk more with you about dignity therapy and life review. And as I kind of get into more into this presentation, part of the aspect of my life that had, or the aspect of my work that got me involved in this is the work that I've been doing in a movement disorder palliative clinic that is here at Rush. And Dr. Jory Fleischer is in charge of that clinic and is doing amazing work. And through working with the patients and their families who come to this clinic, we've been interested in trying to find the kind of interventions that could be particularly helpful around the spiritual and then kind of social and emotional well-being of our patients with movement disorders, kind of in general. So before we kind of delve into this topic, I hope you could kind of join me in a brief exercise that would kind of touch upon this topic that I want to say more about. So where you're sitting or where you're comfortable, I invite you to briefly close your eyes and think back on your life, the life that you have lived up until this point, and maybe scan back to where you were born, where you grew up, and your current adult life. And then I want you to think about this question. At what time or moment in your life did you feel most alive? What moment or time in your life did you feel most alive? And spend a few moments in that place. And look around you. Are you by yourself? Are you there with someone else? Maybe a partner, family members? What are you doing? What are you seeing? How are you engaged through your senses? Is there a particular feeling, a particular smell, particular sound that's surrounding you? Spend a few moments in that place. Okay, and then I'm going to invite you to come back to this presentation. So broadly speaking, I'm going to talk about something in this broad umbrella that's referred to as life review and kind of related to that generativity. And I'm going to start by introducing these two kind of topics as the broader context under which I'll discuss dignity therapy, which is a specific intervention. But like I said, that falls under this kind of broad umbrella of life review and generativity. And I'll introduce that and say more about what our understanding of those two things are in order to share more about dignity therapy. But then I'll come back to these two kind of concepts as a way to kind of explore how you may incorporate or use some of those things in your own life. Okay, so we know that for folks who are ill or diagnosed with an illness, that they may feel like who they are and the things they used to do to make them feel like themselves and feel useful, but because of their illness and perhaps the symptoms that are associated with it, that some of those feelings may fade. And that could vary from person to person, it might fluctuate. But life review and generativity are two things that may help kind of ease some of those feelings or help reconnect to our own sense of self and help us kind of discover or remind us of the things that we really value and the things that are really important to us. So to kind of give more kind of specific definitions of those two things. So with life review, I mean the process of evaluating one's personal memories to connect to the life one has lived and to consider what is important that remains undone. Okay, so kind of in a way, kind of getting to that brief exercise that we did, kind of connecting back to the life we've lived to kind of review that in some way. And then the generativity piece, with that, I mean the concern for and commitment to the well-being of future generations. So with that is the kind of way that we might make our own mark on the world. So a way that we can kind of infuse something of ourselves, an important lesson or an important value, and infuse that into the world in some way. So those are the kind of two broad, kind of the umbrella terms. So I'm going to now turn to dignity therapy. So dignity therapy is a specific intervention that was developed by Dr. Harvey Chochinov, who is a psychiatrist, a Canadian psychiatrist. And he developed this intervention. I'll go over the kind of steps of the intervention in just a second. But the focus of the intervention is around these, what he referred to as dignity conservation tasks. So you can see there's kind of like a broader model in which he kind of laid that out, but it in particular involves the importance of settling relationships, to share words of love, and in a way to kind of prepare one's own legacy. And all of those things are what, like I said, what he refers to as dignity conserving perspectives, that in the face of all the concerns that one might face experiencing illness, some of the distress around symptoms, the way it might impact one's own sense of independence, he identified specific things that might be helpful in addressing that distress. And you might recognize some of the words here that I've already kind of mentioned. So generativity, the way that you can kind of continue your own sense of self, or way that you can preserve your own sense of self. And that kind of connects to things like autonomy and hopefulness. So to kind of get more into the details of this intervention, so typically with the assistance of a therapist or someone who's been trained in offering dignity therapy, the participant is guided through a set of questions, and I'll go over those questions in a bit more detail in a second. But basically, the therapist guides a participant through these questions, and that's normally done in 1 or 2 sessions. So Dr. Chochinov originally designed or used this intervention for patients with cancer. But since then, it's been expanded to other patient populations. Like I said, I've been working in a movement disorders clinic, and um, this intervention is pretty flexible so that if one needs more than 1 or 2 sessions, just because of some folks might have to talk a little more slowly or might need a little bit of help from their care partner to help kind of fill in some of these questions. It's flexible, so it can kind of can be done in more than 1 or 2 sessions. That conversation is recorded and transcribed, and then it goes through an editing process. And the focus there is to kind of polish the narrative a little bit. You might imagine that a big piece of that transcription would involve the therapist asking the question and then the participant answering it. And as I'm kind of doing, our speech has a lot of pauses and ends and things in between. So all of that is kind of removed to make it more and turn it more into a cohesive narrative. And then once that editing is complete, the document is then read to the participant. And that's kind of serves 2 purposes. The one is to give the participant an opportunity to kind of hear back their story as it's read to them. It's kind of one thing to share it, it's something else to kind of hear it. And then it also gives them an opportunity to make any corrections or things or small changes or things that they would want to change in the document. And once all those changes have been made, the participant is provided with a hard copy of the document, and then they are encouraged to do with that document whatever they want. Most people share that with friends, family, or loved ones. And it may even be something that they would turn to again in the future to kind of remind themselves of their own story and the life that they've lived. So that's the kind of details of the intervention. When we were trained by Dr. Chachinov to offer this intervention, he encouraged us to imagine ourselves sitting next to the participant. Sometimes we did these interviews over Zoom or some other electronic format, but to imagine ourselves sitting next to the participant and holding an imaginary photo book of their lives. And we're basically turning through that photo book with them, pausing at each of the significant moments in their lives and helping the participant to kind of describe and elaborate on the key aspects and key moments and experiences of their lives. So these are the questions that kind of structures the interview. And I'm going to go through this both to kind of give you a sense of the kind of questions it involves, but maybe also to kind of spark some ideas, kind of think about which of these questions would you perhaps want to answer for yourself or reflect on for yourself. So the first one is, tell me a little bit about your life history, particularly the parts that you either remember most or think are the most important. And here's that question that I started out with. When did you feel most alive? Are there specific things that you would want your family to know about you? And are there particular things you would want them to remember? What are the most important roles you have played in your life? These can be family roles, vocational roles, community service roles. Why were these so important to you? And what do you think you accomplished in these roles? What are the most important accomplishments? And what do you feel most proud of? I particularly like that question. What do you feel most proud of? Are there particular things that you feel still need to be said to your loved ones? Or things that you'd want to take the time to say once again? What are your hopes and dreams for your loved ones? What have you learned about life that you would want to pass along to others? What advice or words of guidance would you wish to pass along to your son, daughter, partner, etc.? Are there words or perhaps even instructions you would like to offer your family to help prepare them for the future? And then that last one, in creating this permanent record, in knowing that this would be created into a document, are there other things that you would like to include? So those are the questions. And, the therapist role is to kind of create guideposts to help the participant to kind of mark the key moments, kind of mark the dots that help connect the line of the participant's life story. So here are just some snippets of stories or elements that came out of previous participants in this project or in this who's gone through this intervention. So in response to the question, what have you learned about life that you would want to pass along to others? One of the participants says, we don't have much control of the events that come in. Having said that, there's no reason to worry about it. You just make as ambitious plans as you can get. It's regulated by chance events as they happen. You do things, it leads to something, you do something else. But as long as you're honest with yourself, you do whatever you want to do and you don't give up, it should work out pretty well. So that's my totality. So for me, I hear some kind of life wisdom, quite unique things about that participant that they chose to share with their loved ones. Another key life lesson that came out is, I think it's very important that you love yourself, that you like yourself. That's where it starts. And then just one other example, in response to this, what do you feel most proud of? I'm proud that when I became a grandmother, I bought myself a pair of rollerblades and I taught myself how to rollerblade. I rollerbladed from my house to the stop sign and back and did not fall. That was for me and it was wonderful. When I took speech, I gave a whole speech on rollerblading. I brought my rollerblades, my helmet, and my elbow protectors and knee protectors. I brought them to the class to show the students about that. It was wonderful. I felt so alive. The wind, the birds, it was just great. I didn't need anyone to take me anywhere. And this particular participant was someone that was now, at the time of us going through this process, quite dependent on other people. She was not as able to be mobile by herself. And that loss is very real for her. And at the same time, as she was sharing this memory, I saw her whole self light up. So there's a way that our imagination and the way that we remind ourselves of things that we did go through, things that are still part of us, that can bring some of that back to us. And that could also be something that we can share with others. So kind of connecting to that generativity piece, taking something that's quite meaningful to ourselves and finding ways to share that with others. So this is the kind of dignity therapy aspect. Dignity therapy has mostly been offered through research projects, so in a way to kind of test its efficacy and other aspects about the intervention. So it's quite common in the system that Dr. Chachinov is part of in Canada. It's not as common in areas in the US, but I know there are some centers who offer it. And so I would encourage folks to kind of ask the place that they're currently receiving care, to ask them if they know whether dignity therapy is offered in their system. And because it's not as common, as far as I know, it's not covered by health insurance, but because it's oftentimes part of some kind of research project, there might be ways that the cost for participation would be covered. And I want to also just briefly talk about a related kind of intervention that came out of Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York City. And that might be something, and like I said, I'll say more about what it involves in just a second. But if you're going to ask around for certain interventions that's offered at your center, I would also ask whether meaning-centered psychotherapy is something that's offered by your center. And that could be both offered individually or as a group. And I'll say more about why that could potentially be helpful as well. So say, so you hear about dignity therapy, it's maybe something that is of interest to you, and you are not able to find someone who can offer this to you specifically. What can you kind of do on your own? So this kind of takes me back to the concept of life review and generativity. How can you access some of the benefits that those two things might offer? And here, I invite you to be creative, to think about big and small ways that you can infuse something of yourself into a recording, a video recording, or audio recording, or in writing letters, or in dictating letters, to share some of your key values, the things that are important to you, lessons that you've learned, things you want your loved ones to know. What ways can you think about? I give some examples here, but I'm sure you might find other things or other ways that you, in big and small ways, participate in some of this sharing something about yourself with others. So be creative. Maybe use some of these suggestions I have here, or think of others. This legacy project idea is something that's part of the meaning-centered psychotherapy that I mentioned earlier. And this encourages participants to do some kind of legacy project. So some kind of project where you can capture something that's important to you, essential to you, and share it with others. And in my experience, folks have done things like compiling their favorite recipes or family recipes, creating a photo album of like key memories to share with loved ones, a compilation of meaningful songs, and maybe sharing some of that with their loved ones, or asking someone to kind of help them put some of those songs together. And there might be some other ways, maybe as you think about what still remains to be done, maybe there's some loved ones, some broken relationships that you want to kind of reconnect with, or share some important words of love and care to others. So these are kind of things that can be done kind of informally, but I wanted to also just share some resources. So this Dignity and Care website is Dr. Chachanov's website, where they share about the work that they're doing around dignity therapy. There's also some ways to kind of keep up to date with new training, and also there's a bunch of resources that I encourage folks to go and look at. There is a book that Dr. Chachanov wrote. It's called Dignity Therapy, Final Words for Final Days. But I want to just note that that's more of a training manual than a book that might help participants who want to kind of receive that kind of intervention for themselves. It does have a lot of research that kind of talks about the benefits of that specific intervention. And then I wanted to just kind of highlight that you might have heard of StoryCorps. That's something that's done through NPR, and it's a way to kind of meet up with someone and share their story, which gets recorded, and then it's hosted in the Library of Congress. So, that for me kind of connects to this idea of life review and generativity. And then there's also a product that's called Storyworth. So this is something that you'd have to pay for, but it's a service that basically sends certain prompts that one then can respond to, and those prompts are compiled and turned into a book that can be shared with others. So you might hear there's some kind of connection to the dignity therapy intervention that we talked about. Okay, I'm going to stop here and leave some time for questions. And thank you very much for your attention. I welcome any questions that you might have.
Great. Thanks so much, Dirk. Really appreciate this wonderful talk on this very important topic. The first question I'll just dive on in is you walked us through what dignity therapy is and what the questions are, but could you speak a little bit more on how dignity therapy could help, for instance, with someone who's struggling with no longer being independently mobile?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. Yeah, someone that is no longer independently mobile, I wanted to mention that I think the loss that's associated with that is quite immense. And I know that dignity therapy is not a quick fix. A loss like that for me goes along with grief. It's a loss that needs to be processed and grieved. The benefit that I see in dignity therapy is that there's a way that it allows us to kind of claim some of the agency or some of the things that we still are able to do. In a way, it's encouraging us to say, to remind us of the life that we have lived and the things that are of value, that there certainly are losses that were part of that. And it creates an opportunity to kind of reconnect to the things that we still want to do. So in a way, I see that as people kind of reconnecting to things that's been important to them and being intentional about the things that they still want to contribute or they still want to share with others. So yeah, I think I'll stop there.
In a similar vein, I'm wondering what you think about those who are feeling, anger or guilt or even just like grief. Can you speak a little bit on that as well and how dignity therapy can relate to that?
Yeah, so I think dignity therapy, because it's kind of the final product is a document that's shared with loved ones. I would say that dignity therapy is not the best way to kind of work through feelings of anger, feelings of grief. I do think it is important to have a safe space where those feelings can be voiced and processed. And perhaps that could be in a counseling or therapy setting. But part of why I'm saying that dignity therapy is not as helpful for those things is because in the process of creating a document, a lot of those feelings are kind of captured in that document to be shared with others. And an important part of the intervention is kind of helping participants think through what parts of their story they want to be captured in that way that would, in a way, kind of make it more permanent. So, for many people, stories of grief, stories of anger are very much part of how they see themselves and very much part of their story. And you can be intentional in deciding whether you want to kind of capture that and share with others. But for others, they might say, I want to voice that I'm angry and I want to voice that I'm grieving, but I don't necessarily want to capture that as part of the document. So in a way, you might kind of say, let me work on those areas in a different setting, maybe with my counselor or a therapist or someone that I trust that I can speak to. But in terms of capturing something more permanent, you want to kind of think through the key things you want to share versus the ones you want to leave out.
That's a super helpful distinction of what is dignity therapy and what other, rehabilitation therapies can be useful for. And so this last question that we have is kind of switching gears, but how would you say chaplains can help facilitate end of life discussions, legacy, and preparation for those types of things? Just chaplains in general.
Yeah, as a chaplain, I appreciate that question. And, I think part of why chaplains may be helpful, so I would say, yes, they would be helpful. I hope they would be helpful. And part of why they would is because, it's um, particularly at end of life, uh, belief systems or spirituality, the way that we kind of make sense or meaning out of our experiences could be so infused or enmeshed with the beliefs that we hold dear to us, whether informed by our religious tradition or informed by what we value in terms of our own spirituality. And because chaplains are trained in various religious traditions and the way that people's beliefs kind of inform their actions and coping and all of that, I think chaplains have a helpful kind of background and understanding of all those things to create a safe space for people to kind of engage around those key themes. So part of what our training involves is to be particularly sensitive to honoring and respecting the beliefs that others have. Most chaplains are kind of grounded in their own faith tradition or meaning-making system, meaning-making system, while at the same time honoring how others' beliefs and meaning-making systems might be different from their own. So, we never impose our own beliefs onto others. But because we know how helpful beliefs and faith can be in helping one cope, we are particularly good at facilitating or holding space for others who want to engage in those kind of sacred conversations, in particular to the way that you described it, as all of those decisions are made, or as all of those decisions kind of take place in a kind of end of life setting.
That makes sense. I just wanted to ask that while we had you on board. That's all the questions we have for today. Dirk, thank you so much for joining us and really letting us in on what dignity therapy is and what you do a little bit.